Did that. Thanks, Frank. Okay, so again, welcome everybody. And then so today is our very first session series for our Rise and Grime, and we're very happy to have Melanie to join us. So a little background about this. So Melanie joined us for our spring conference at West Virginia, and then she presented a couple presentation, and everybody was really engaging and very excited, wanted to learn more about this topic. So I'm happy to invite her back, even though she already moved to Scotland, but she graciously agreed to having this session with us. So talking about focusing on students' mental health. So I think back in spring, that was kind of in the tail of pandemic, and students were dealing with a lot of mental issue. And I don't know about you guys personally, I feel like some of students I can see they are still struggling with some of the mental health issue, even, considered as post-pandemic. So I think this will be a good, our kind of kickoff session from Melanie. So Melanie, she's a psychotherapist and has a lot of experience in the field at practice. So let me just let Melanie just take the floor, and then Melanie, I can monitor the chat for you if but depending on if you want to take questions in the end or whatever you want to do.
I would actually love people to put any questions that come up, as I'm not planning on speaking for a super long time, because I think in this area, a lot of what people really want is discussion. At least that's the feeling I got at the conference, in the NENA conference in West Virginia. So, people, please feel free to put questions in the chat. If it absolutely can't wait, feel free just to speak up. I want this to be very collaborative and discussion oriented. I just have a few slides just to kind of get the topic going, and then we can definitely talk about what your questions are, issues that have come up maybe this semester even, anything like that. So I'm happy for this to be very open and relaxed in that way. So let's make sure I can do this share screen. Thank you again. And thank you for that very kind introduction, Melanie. That was very, very lovely. So let's see if I can do this here. All right. So can y'all see my slides?
Yes. Oh, good. Perfect.
So I don't know about y'all, but in our house, we tend to say, it's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. Because, life has been a lot for most of us, especially since 2020. And so, that's just kind of my joke for kind of starting things off today. The real issue I think that educators now are facing is that you are teaching in the age of Gen Z, right? It is no longer where we can just say, these are the standards, you got to stick to them, and only a few people come to you with an extraordinary circumstance. Gen Z has kind of revolutionized how we're understanding the application of mental health in education. Gen Z is the most diverse generation we currently have living, in terms of racial and ethnic diversity, as well as gender and sexuality diversity. Almost half of them have a formally diagnosed mental health condition, which means many, many, many more have undiagnosed mental health conditions. A quarter of them were diagnosed in the pandemic. As with all of us, they feel the pandemic has not supported their mental health. And over half of them are currently taking medication for mental illness. So that's a much larger proportion than maybe we would have seen in the past. So just y'all are in this, y'all deal with Gen Z every day. From my awareness of how Gen Z is working for educators, is that they have really different expectations than maybe what your experiences were when you were in college, or even your experiences teaching millennials or Gen Xers. They are much more likely to be willing to talk about mental illness and how they're feeling and how they're doing, and to expect support and accommodation, not hope for it or wish for it or beg for it, but to expect it. And y'all know all the rules from, that come from student affairs, that come from the American with Disabilities Act, where you have to provide accommodations, but there's a different level that we're seeing with Gen Z. And so I think that really affects how y'all as educators, can move in the classroom and can work with students. And I heard people at the conference talking about, how do we handle this? This feels different to us now. So just as kind of a really kind of high level thought about that, for managing in this new era of mental health being so far at the forefront, really the foundation of managing in this situation is empathy. And that can be hard when you have 2/3 of your class coming to you online or in office hours, talking about their personal problems and wanting some sort of accommodation, whether it's documented or not. You may have your own personal thoughts and feelings about, them diagnosing themselves based on watching a TikTok. You may have your own thoughts and feelings about the wider availability of support that they have compared to prior generations. Students now have emotional support animals in their dorms. It's just a very different environment. And we can have all of those thoughts and feelings for ourselves. But, the real position to take is one of empathy, that this is very real for them, whether we understand it or not. It is their real experience, and that is going to affect their life, no matter how anybody else feels about that. I think the second question to kind of ask is like, how far do you want to go to support students? I hear faculty say, I feel like everybody wants an individualized educational experience now, whether they have an accommodation plan or not. And I can't do that when I have a class of 120 students. So thinking through those issues of what is your goal, right? Your goal is to reach your students, to teach your students. You want them to learn your information and to be able to walk away with it. But you also have to be able to, maintain your job and not be teaching 120 classes, right? And you also want to make sure that you're treating students equitably. Well, that's the thing. It's not, equity is different than the same. Equity means that everybody has the same opportunity to be able to get the information. And if someone's mental illness is getting in the way, that can become inequitable, right? So we have to think about how to find those balances. And, we can talk about that. Like if y'all are running into those kind of issues, we could talk about that in discussion and kind of see what might, what kind of solutions might feel both fair to you, but also fair and equitable to your students. Another kind of important piece of this is managing your own reactions, right? So I've heard faculty talk about, oh, well, that person's a repeat offender, they abuse the system. What stands out to me in that language is the penal language, right? That's like talking about students like they're prisoners, right? And we do that a lot in the US, but it's like that when we have that reaction, it is showing that something has gone further than we are comfortable with. And so we have to think about, okay, where is my boundary here? How do I manage this situation in a way that is providing whatever support I can to the student that I feel comfortable with, but also so I am now not feeling like my students are criminals, right? So we may have people who are frequent flyers to our office seeking support and accommodation. So if they are always coming to you, they clearly need more support than just you, right? And so kind of helping yourself notice using your own personal reactions as data to help you be able to know, okay, what's the next step in this path here? Does this person need more mental health support? Does this person need some other kind of support? And then I think the last piece that I've heard faculty talk about is burnout and feeling like they just want to give up, right? So giving up on helping students, like, no, I'm not helping anybody anymore. They have to just follow the standards. If they need accommodations, they have to go to students with disability services. If they're not willing to do that, then, I can't help them. So there's giving up on the students. There's giving up on having standards. I just do anything that the students want. I pass everybody and I just move on. There's also sort of giving up on education, giving up on your career to a degree, right? Where it becomes so overwhelming that it feels like I can't do this anymore. I think that happens probably a lot more for junior faculty, especially for adjuncting faculty, right, who have the heaviest teaching loads often. So kind of thinking about what are your boundaries and your limits for yourself that will help you not get to the point where you feel like you need to give up or want to give up. So I think that's the last piece in terms of like boundaries in for thinking through, like, how do I accomplish this? How do I support the students who need support around their mental health while also taking care of myself as a educator and as a person? So I really just kind of started there. What I want to hear about today, if folks have some comments or ideas, are, what are your challenges? What questions do you have around mental health? And it doesn't have to be just about these four, kind of bullets I talked about. It can really be anything related to mental health in students that we can put on the table. So I can't see the chat for some reason, so I don't know if you have questions. So Leslie, yeah, what's going on?
Hi, thanks for this discussion. I don't mean to start on a negative Nancy note, but we're having some discussion about student behavior, and particularly our role as faculty, both in the online setting and in the in-person setting, because it does seem like there is a lot more aggression and taking out on faculty. And even I taught a strictly online class, and I had a student who was so disruptive with his obsession with COVID-19 that it just stopped the class. So I don't know what anyone else is doing if you're having these conversations, but they're difficult to have because for us, once we send a student to security, we never find out if they've left or if they just come back to our class, and what do we do? So
Okay, so that is a great question. And I do think online teaching and COVID have added new wrinkles to that maybe we didn't have before. So I'm just going to get out of my screen share here because I want to be able to like see everybody, and I can't see everybody in screen share mode at the moment for whatever reason. I don't know, my computer and I aren't getting along. So aggression like that, Leslie, can be a sign of bad behavior, like the kind of the way you thought about it. And the only thing you can really deal with as an educator is behavior, because you're not in the job of diagnosis and treatment and all of that. But a security is definitely an appropriate call when someone's being aggressive in person. But so is whatever pathway you have for student counseling support. So most universities now have given y'all plenty of training on, if you think someone's having mental health problems, here's where you refer them. So in addition to calling security, if security is not going to do that referral, that's a referral that you could also make if your college or university has a pathway for a referral without student involvement, if that makes sense, which I think many do now. And it's hard because once security is involved, that can also feel escalating to an aggressive student, right? But your safety and the safety of other students around you is primary. So if you are feeling threatened or intimidated in a way that what you're thinking is security, you trust your gut and you get them involved. So I'm not trying to be like, I don't know, pro discipline or something, but it's a real issue because aggression can be a sign of lots of different things. So I guess, in an online setting, it might be a little different. Like maybe in online settings, do y'all have the ability to like mute a student and where they can't unmute themselves?
So in Zoom, absolutely, but in our current course management platform, not really. So it required me to be more heavily moderating the conversation, which it was a technology class. So I really didn't want to because the students, of course, are more versed in technology than I'll ever be. So that one was a real struggle. And unfortunately, the student had delusions of really just strange things with COVID and conspiracies and things that were frightening. And I did have security do a mental wellness check on the student, and they're like, "Oh, he's fine." Like, I
Yeah,
don't.
well, and security is not actually the right people to be doing
Right.
that, right? Like
It's student
security.
affairs did whoever
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
deployed.
And I've heard from other people like at the conference, Tracy, I see you're here. And I remember, you talking to me about an experience you had at the conference where the resources on that were available on campus still weren't really sufficient for the situation. And Leslie, I hear you saying the same thing, unfortunately. Anna Marie raised a good question of what do you say to the student, once you call security, what do you say to the student on the way? So let's walk through how you might handle that in an in-person classroom. Paul, I think you said, give the class a break, right? Like for that. So of course, if somebody's being so disruptive, you have to call security. That's when you say, hey, y'all, we're going to take a few minutes break and I'm going to help, Joe out for a few minutes. And then you call security. Well, first, if there isn't another colleague around, you get another colleague for support, even if you don't know them well, like literally another responsible adult who's not a student. Try to have someone there with you because that is very important for your safety and your support. Call security and you tell Joe, you say, hey man, this has gotten a little much for the classroom and we need some additional support. And so I'm going to get that down here now for us and for you. Because your behavior in class is really beyond what's okay and it's too disruptive. And you also have the right to make judgment calls that if that feels unsafe, like if you feel saying that to Joe's face is unsafe, you do what you need to do to keep yourself feeling safe, right? So if you lie about who you're calling, that's actually okay, right? And it's not ideal. That's the thing. In these circumstances, we are so far from the ideal, right? The ideal is that a student with delusional symptoms is not coming in person to class, but that's not the reality of the world anymore. So focus on keeping yourself safe, trusting your gut, giving your class a break to deal with this. If the break takes so long that you don't even get back to class, it happens. It's going to be better to have that situation managed than to be trying to do this in front of the class where things could get even more escalated. Other students could start acting out if they're his friend, or if they even just, for whatever reason, all of that needs to be avoided for safety. Paul, were you raising your hand? No? Okay. Leslie, does that?
I was just agreeing.
Good. I like that. Thanks. Leslie, does that kind of help answer kind of that question some?
It does. It's the camaraderie that is important. I guess too that we're really struggling with, with privacy laws. If a student does visit our wellness center or does have an interaction, we don't necessarily get the follow-up, so don't know how to respond later. So if the student comes back, I can't say anything and I can't know anything, but again, then my security might be at risk. So that's a hard one too, is all of this follow-up. And then how do I change my teaching if the student is back in class?
Okay. So there's nothing in privacy laws that prevents you from asking the student, hey, I know class last week was really tough. How are you doing today? Are things any better? Have you been able to get any support or help in your life? And the student can choose not to answer you. Privacy laws don't prevent you from asking the student. They might prevent you from asking the mental health service office or whatever. In terms of teaching your class, and Frank, I do see your hand. I don't want you to think I'm ignoring you. It's kind of like working with a toddler or working with a dog. Consistency, right? So every time something happens, you have to kind of deal with it, right? So it's not like, well, I did this once and he's still acting out. Oh, well, you're allowed to hold that boundary with him in this example of, yeah, you can't act out like that in class. If you can't stop talking about COVID so we can focus on what we're doing, you're going to have to leave for the day, Joe. And then if he won't leave, be like, okay, taking a few minute break, and you call security again. So because eventually, if you have to keep calling security, that will continue to escalate things with student affairs. So for example, if every time you call security, you also alert student affairs, look, I've had to call security 3 times in class on Joe. You've got to help me out because the other students aren't getting an education. That's going to help. Does that make sense? Is this something that you and your department, like you and your colleagues in your department, are talking about together, or do you feel alone in that, Leslie?
No, we're actually, as an entire community, we're trying to deal with this in the best way possible.
That's wonderful. That's great. Frank, you've been waiting a bit.
Yeah, thank you on that. I don't know if that's a mental health issue or individual students, but right now, students are always on their earback or say on ear headset all the time. And I was kind of encountered with many situations like that. I asked them to take it off during class time. Okay, they did. And when next class section, or say a few more months later, they put it back on. Do they really need that to make themselves feel secure, comfort first? Second, I had a student, this is really weird. I'm not gonna say the name, but the behavior was like this. This students put on the earset with a cassette, not a cell phone like Spotify or anything. This person used cassette, play music, and with a really old school earset on. And there was one day I was teaching organization behavior, and I get this iconic person's video play on the screen. The author named Jordan Peterson. He's really famous from California. And this particular student raised his hand and say, "Hey, Frank, don't play that video. I don't want to see that in the class. We see enough video." Because this is a flipped classroom, I pull up different material for them to study before they come to class. And I use this Jordan Peterson's informations out there to emphasize the content I want them to learn. But my questions over here is, this is a really destructive behavior to the entire classroom's learning rather than just himself, I mean, this individual. And at that moment, I talk to the class this way. This is what I did. I say, I know everybody coming from different backgrounds. You have different situations. You may have different things you encounter with. However, if you're not comfortable with the content we are going over right now, you are free to dismiss from the class. Or if you want to take a break, go ahead. Once this is done, you're going to come back. The whole class went silent. And this particular student, he didn't move at all. And it's just like that went on for like 20, 30 seconds. I say, I would like to continue the class, but the link for the video I'll provide it in the D2L, which is our learning platform for them to watch it on their own time. My solution for this is I don't want to stop the learning, and I don't want to raise another level of interruption to the entire classroom rather than just my teaching. And after that, I talk to the chairperson for this specific situations. I see no further follow-up from the chairperson. I don't know if that's something. And the questions I have for Melanie over here and the help I want from you was, is this a mental issues or is it something just a disruptions for the classroom? Thank you.
Yeah. So, wow, that, what did I just do? I hit the wrong button on the chat. That sounds really challenging, having a student challenge you like that in class on like, I don't want to watch this video you're showing, right? That's the kind of thing. So before I was a therapist, I was a sociologist, and as I was a researcher, sociology researcher and educator. So I've taught at the college level for a number of years, and it is so challenging when you're up there and, you know, a student calls you out like that. And it's kind of like, wait a second, I'm the professor, you know, you're the student. Listen, you know, I'm here with expertise you don't have. The cassette thing with that student could have been some kind of, you know, just weird hobby quirk, whatever. But that behavior, regardless of its origin, is disruptive, disrespectful, and really inappropriate. You know, if you were showing a very violent or graphic kind of video in class that could be upsetting, that's one thing. But I don't think you were doing that in business and organizational, you know, hospitality or whatever the focus of your class was, you know. And so I think the way you handled it was actually perfect. I actually think the way you said, look, we all come from different places. If you don't want to watch something or participate, you can go and you can come back. And the evidence that it was perfect was the reaction. That student didn't do anything else. Everybody in the class was quiet, supporting you and not being like, actually, I agree with him. No, everybody was probably a bit mortified for him and feeling bad for you, would be my guess. And so I think you actually handled it well, even though I can tell that it didn't feel well. You know, it didn't feel good to have to handle that. Has that student since been disruptive in class?
He has his setup all the time, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I did not call him up again if say I want you to check off your set in a classroom or what. But every time when we have a discussion on like a case study or things like that needs to have a group discussion, he'll put it back on again.
So that was your first question about, you know, everybody wearing earbuds. Do they need them to feel safe and comfortable and secure? I have a daughter who's Gen Z, so I understand the frustration of the constant earbuds. She wears them at her jobs, and I don't understand how she gets away with it, but whatever. You have every right as a professor, unless your university tells you you can't. In my opinion, you have every right to say, take those off during class, to the whole class. Unless a student has something from the Students with Disabilities or Student Affairs documented accommodations of needing to be able to wear them, there are some mental health and developmental conditions where having earbuds or headphones on is supportive. So it can be supportive for people with different types of learning disabilities, people with autism, people with ADHD, and some other mental health conditions. But unless they have the documented stuff of this student is allowed to wear headphones in class, you have every right to say, you know, y'all need to take these off in class unless I've spoken to you separately, period. Now, they may not comply, and then you get to decide how much you're going to chase that, you know, like how much time and energy are you going to put towards an individual student who's being defiant. But I am definitely old enough that, you know, I'm Gen X. I'm like, to me, it feels disrespectful. I can't even imagine. So it's very hard kind of being on that side of it too.
Melanie, you know what? It's hard to say and it's really sad. I give up. I give up about the earbud things. If they want to wear it, wear it. If they want to run, they run. And surprisingly, the exam I just done it this week is more than 92%, the entire class average. That's a surprise.
Oh, so it's interesting because it comes across like they aren't paying attention to you, but obviously they're learning if they're all doing so well on the evaluation.
So
I don't
know if I should give up or just don't care. But
oh my goodness, if you came in one day wearing them yourself.
I did not.
That would be funny, right? Flip the script, right?
Thank you for the help. Yes.
You know, how would they react if when they were doing their presentations that are graded, if you sat there with big old headphones on? That, you know, that could.
Hey, I won't try it. We do teaching evaluations every single semesters. They rate on us. So my pay rate is based on what they see me. So I don't want to do that.
I understand that. It was just kind of a funny visual image for me of you up
It
there
is
with
unfair,
like
though. I mean,
some big Beats headphones on, you know, while they're presenting. You know, but I do think it's fine to say the standard, but then if you don't want to go after it, you know, you can just let it go. And it's okay to give up on things. Sometimes our safe boundary for ourselves is giving up, right? So like, I'm not going to chase that thing that I can't fix. So it can feel defeatist, like giving up, but really, Frank, what you're doing is you're making a choice of what you're going to prioritize, and you're choosing not to prioritize that, and that's okay.
And I choose to accept so-called imperfections.
Yes. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts? Anything from the chat that's coming up?
Yeah, can I say something to Frank as well?
Yeah.
Frank, this always happens in my classrooms as well. And sometimes I think that they wear them because it might be just they feel safer that way, but they might also just be bored. And it sounds like this particular student is scoring really well on their exams. And so it might be a matter of just approaching that student to say, listen, I know you're wearing your headphones. At this point, I understand you need to wear them, or I don't care why you're wearing them. And you're also scoring really well on your grades. But if I find that your grades are slipping for some reason, I will, I want to talk to you about that, because it might be the time to take the headphones off. But if they're doing really well, they might just be bored. And at that point, you kind of have to just chalk it up to let it go. But if you find that they're slipping, then talk to them.
You know,
Yeah.
Gen Z is a generation that's used to having a lot of things going on at once, right? The TV's on, they have their earphones in, they're listening and watching something on their phone, and they're doing something else, right? There's this constant stimulation that they are used to, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So, you know, it could just be that for them, they just like having that extra stimuli. You still have a right to say no headphones or earbuds unless you have accommodations, if that's your choice. So.
Thank you for both of you.
Yeah. Any other questions that folks are having right now? Or experiences they've had? Yeah, Paul.
I've actually gone and tried to syndicate the risk by going to either the department chair or the dean when I've had issues like this. And for various things. And two of the answers that I commonly get are not satisfactory. One common answer I get is, let it go, don't worry about it. And then another answer is prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. And I'm not comfortable with that either. I was looking for, a dynamic type of explanation, what's going on. I'd love a solution that helps everyone. And do you have any advice on that?
So Paul, you're talking about situations more like what Leslie talked about. So somebody who's being really disruptive in class and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. So when your leadership in your department or in your university is dismissive, that feels so unsupportive to you, but it also feels unsupportive of the student, because a student in distress or a student in class who's acting strangely is also not getting their education, right? And if they have mental illness, that's not their fault, and they need more supports. So I think there are some situations where prosecute to the fullest extent of the law can be appropriate. I think they are very far few and extreme, like when students stalk faculty or attack faculty, right? So very extreme, very rare. In those cases, yeah, you do what you need to do for yourself. But
Sure.
in the majority of cases, the university and your department do need to take that approach that you're describing, something that's more dynamic. One approach is that if you have multiple students in a class who are visibly struggling in class, maybe not to the extent of having to call security, but maybe people have panic attacks in class or are breaking out in tears in class or whatever, get somebody in from student mental health to come and have a class, like have somebody come to your class and be like, hey, I'm hearing y'all are stressed and it's coming out in class. Let's talk about it. Right? Like that's an option that is, like you said, more dynamic and more solution focused rather than dismissive or prosecutorial. I know that a lot of universities did that right after the pandemic. I know some universities have also done it after school shootings. So I'm thinking of Virginia Tech, I think may have done it, is for whatever reason popping into my mind. So that can be a way of, and it's unfortunately a lot of work on you if your school doesn't have a process in place to make that happen. But and yeah, I think most don't. And there's no guarantee that student mental health services would have someone to do that. If they didn't, if they're like, look, that's beyond our scope, we're slammed, whatever they say, you can also go to the community and find people like me who would be happy to come and do that. It would be very boundaried because it would be like a guest speaker kind of situation in that scenario, not like somebody from mental health services on campus. It would be better to have somebody through the campus support services. But, if it's so disruptive to class, then the whole class is affected and the whole class might need some sort of something. And the stories I hear from faculty, it's not that there's one student in a class who's freaking out or having panic attacks. It's a lot of them, right? Multiple students, and sometimes they pair up and are friends or whatever might be happening. And so I like your idea of like wanting dynamic solutions as opposed to, just forget about it, let it go, they'll be fine. Because they're not fine. We know they're not fine. Y'all know they're not fine. So I think that might be one idea. And maybe one you could even go to your administration about.
Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Oh, Timothy, you have a hand up.
Thank you so very much. Our case here is a little bit different because here in Key West, we live in an island. And one of the issues that we have a lot of times is the fact that rent prices are very high. Students are working sometimes 1 or 2 jobs to afford just to live. And we have started programs, what we call Tuga Shelves, which is our mascot, the Tuga, to assist students who have food insecurities. And where that's coming in is that if our students have a primary job and a secondary job just to be able to make rent, then you have family and social activities. School becomes 5th, 6th, 7th down the list. And so they're already coming into the classroom with a higher level of burnout and a higher level of stress than what I've definitely seen prior to the pandemic. I like your ideas of the dynamics of allowing somebody to come into the classroom to talk about mental health. But do you have any maybe strategies about assisting students in relieving some of that sort of burnt out, level for them?
The burnout in terms of like how overwhelmed they are because of their socioeconomic conditions, or
well, it's more of if you are already working and you're spending a lot more time there, then you have a lot less time for your classwork. You have a lot less time to get homework done. You're not reaching out to other students. And that sort of snowballs into sometimes outbursts in the classroom, but also then they're not achieving the grades that they think they should have because they just don't have time. And so that becomes an issue as well, because, we're trying to do the best that we can, but we can't just totally get rid of our that the rigor that we have in the classroom just because students are a little bit stressed. And trying to work with that dynamic has been quite challenging.
Yes, the especially working with students who are struggling so much to live, right? And that can vary so much across universities and even within universities. I think, that would actually be something where, again, bringing in some supports from the university, if they exist, either from mental health services or from, a lot of schools have like student support services where you can go to them and they'll help you with like study skills or organizational skills, things like that. They might also be a good fit in the case you're describing, where it's about figuring out your priorities, your goals, and then how to reach them in terms of time management. So if what you need is 10 hours a week to do homework and you only have 5, then how do you pick what to do in those 5 hours? Without judgment, without shame, just practicality. You need 10, you have 5. What do you choose and what do you let go? Maybe you give up on studying for quizzes because they're the smallest proportion of your grade, and you focus on the test and the paper that are the largest proportion of your grade. As an educator, I hate having to talk that way, but as a person who works with people who are working with multiple jobs, going to school, having kids, being poor, having chronic illness, something has to give. You can only do so much. So that is something that like mental health services or like learning disability services or something might be able to come in and provide some support on. But I think it's about goal setting, right? So if their goal is to get the degree, but maybe they're not so worried about how quickly they get it, maybe they need to take fewer classes a semester. Maybe they need to lower their standards a little bit. Maybe they don't have to get straight A's. Maybe they can get A's and B's, or maybe even a C sometimes, right? Like whatever their standards are, because they could also be bringing a level of perfectionism to what they're doing that could be a bad match for what they actually have available bandwidth wise, right? There's only it's not that we all have the same 24 hours a day, because we do not. Your students do not have the 24 hours a day that the students at Yale have who aren't working. Very different 24 hours, right? So, but they only do have so much time in a day. So does that help? Are those some ideas that might be helpful?
I think so. I think there's you know, the issue with time management, I think, is always a little bit challenging with students in the first place, especially with traditional students versus, you know, continuing students. But I think that's some really good strategies to really focus on the beginning of class times for each semester. So then that way at the onset, you know, students have better strategies in how to manage that time. So thank you.
Yeah. And Anna Marie, you said, I hate telling my students that they should drop a class in the semester. That's really an advising. So what I'm talking about is more of an advising issue, right? That when you are advising with students, that you find out what else is happening in their life, to find out if they actually have time for taking 4 classes. Maybe they only have time for 2. So as an advisor, that's where advising, I think, comes really key. So you don't end up in a situation where halfway through the semester, you're having to tell somebody to withdraw, right? So I hear that, because it can feel like a failure, but I also think good advising that digs a little deeper on their life can help with that. Elizabeth, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Yes, I wanted to share, we certainly experienced more than our fair share, as everyone has, of mental health challenges with students this semester in particular. But one particular situation I wanted to bring up to ask thoughts on how to address actually happened during we have a public restaurant that we run as a capstone course, and you know, students rotate as servers, et cetera. So during our service last night, a student that doesn't have an accommodation plan on hand, but I know has had struggles in the last few years as she's been in the program, was visibly upset. I approached, you know, student was serving a table, and I said, "Oh gosh, you look like you're about to cry. Is everything okay?" And the response was, "Great. Tell me how else horrible I look." And I said, "Listen, do you need?" I put my hand on her. I said, "Listen, do you need help? We can have someone. Stop touching me. Stop touching me. Stop leaving me alone. Just leave me alone. I don't want to draw any attention to it. The more attention you draw to it, the worse it's going to be." And so we kind of let her go for a little while, because she clearly didn't want to have an interaction at that point about how she was doing. She wanted to continue to try and serve, and but was clearly visibly anxious and you know, upset, and it was busy. And you know, about a half hour later, when we approached to say, you know what, this student can cover your section, why don't you take a break, get some water, et cetera, et cetera. It was, if you just stop talking about it, I can get through this. Just leave me alone. And at that point, I pulled the instructor and I said, sometimes we have to make a decision for a student. And the student might be saying to themselves, might be saying to us, I want this, leave me alone. But if that's not in the best interest of what's happening on in this class and with other guests around, we might say, we need to remove you from this. We need to remove you from this circumstance right now. Can't have, and I just want to check in on that, because it's so fresh. It just happened last night, and you know, I wasn't, you know, you're never sure, because I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not sure if that was the right direction. We did allow the student to continue, and then the student is very up and down, and then came to a plateau after a little while. But in that moment, I really wanted to remove her from the situation. I really wanted to remove her and say, I need you to step. I know that's not what you want right now, but this is what I need to happen. And I'm just wondering how you would have handled that.
So first off, it sounds like y'all handled it well. So I hear that it's fresh, and I can imagine you know, like you put your hand on somebody's arm to be comforting, and they're like, stop touching me. Like, I know for me, I'd be like that would catch me off guard. So I can imagine how that felt for you. And I just hear you, because I can tell it's fresh. She was obviously struggling with something. We have no idea what. You do have every right to say, you're coming off the floor now for a break. The way you are right now is not okay for this position right now. You need a break. We're going to let someone else do this. I'm going to give you some time on your own, and then we can talk before you go back out. because your capstone cafe is a job. And in the workforce, they're not going to just let you decide to continue working impaired if it's a good working environment, right? So for example, in hospitals, if a doctor is visibly drunk and they say, I can keep doing it as they walk into surgery, let's hope somebody stops them, right? So you have a right as an employer in this cafe to stop someone and say, how you are right now is not working for you. Not say it in those words. That's not the right words, but to pause it.
Espresso, so I apologize, but I appreciate hearing that, because in the moment, not sure whether you should whether that would push a student over the edge, and that's what that gut check is. The gut check is ask, how are you okay? Do you want? It's always to form it in the phrase of a question, but that puts them in the receipt of making that determination, and then you realize, okay, well, I shouldn't have let the student make that determination. And not wanting to tip the scales to make a student even more upset by exercising that kind of authority.
I think starting like the first inquiry being like, hey, are you doing all right? You seem, a little emotional, or however you might phrase it, however they respond. Like, I think starting the first inquiry as a question is very appropriate. But if after that they are still impaired for doing the job they're supposed to be doing, whatever it is, you have every right to go in and not ask, but tell, right? So again, this is like toddlers. You don't ask, you tell, right? Okay, it's time for you to take a break, and I'm going to have Sarah cover your tables for now. And I want you to go take a break, and I'll come talk to you in a few minutes.
Thank you.
No question. Yeah. So like your instinct to do that was, I think, accurate. I do think it is very, it's kind and respectful to start with a question, but that student could not accurately gauge their abilities in that moment because of whatever was going on with them and their mental health.
Right. Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah. Other questions or comments, thoughts?
May I share my experiences follow-up with NENA? I had students, somehow they give up themselves. They forget or intentionally not doing their homework, and sometimes miss the major exams. It is not me want to give them second chance. Talk to the entire class. If you miss any assignments, please document that, and you can still earn your points back. But if without any reasons, there's not much I can help. If you miss, or a student miss a major exam, again, I talk to the entire class, I would offer a makeup exam for everybody. If you miss an exam for whatever reasons, you are allowed to take it at the final. I'm not going to do it during the semester. I will set a special time for them. Also, if anyone not happy with the grade they have for a particular exams, he or she or they may retake that exam, but the questions will be different. So if the grade they got from the retaken, that can replace the grade they have, which is what's worse. If they had a better grade on the makeup exams, they will be able to replace the worst grade they have. But if it's getting worse and it's time for the makeup exams, I'm not going to touch the previous grade they have, which is they still keep the grade they have originally. So I know in this generation it's not easy to handle, but it looks like that is a lot of burden to instructors like we are here. I have 2 kids in the college, and this is my hope. The way I'm treating my student, I hope those professors treating my kids the same way too. That's my hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think your approach is very generous, Frank. And I think each, as educators, everybody has to make a decision on what's going to work for me, like what's too much and what's not too much. And that can depend on a whole host of factors. And Paul put in the chat and said, a phrase that I use is sometimes you have to take a step backwards in order to continue forward. It happens to all of us once in a while. I really like that normalizing and that, and that sort of like what Frank said about imperfections, right? That none of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. We all have problems. Things get in the way. We all have bad situations happen to us. And what I found as an educator, and this was decades ago, students have so much more going on than we know. You know, I would have students come to class and be like, I'm sorry, I missed last week. I had been assaulted and I was at the hospital. Like, and you would never have known unless they came to tell you, you know, like it's just, it is a messy world out there. So I think when providing the flexibility that you is within your boundaries, I think is really kind and helpful, because it does help students feel like you want them to succeed and you want them to learn. I think when there's a lot of rigidity, students can feel that they are not being set up for success, right? This generation wants to feel set up for success big time. And they also want that personalized touch, you know, that's really what they're used to. And so it's the degree to which you can offer it, I think varies, but I do think it's also probably a good fit for Gen Z. Any other questions or comments or anecdotes that have been weighing on you?
This has been really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good. I appreciate that, Paul. I could talk about this stuff all day, so so thanks. I appreciate that. On my slide, I had my contact information, but I know that Yao Ling has it as well. I can pop that slide back up for a second if anybody wants to see. Let's see if I can make this work again briefly. Cute little cat photo. There we go. And I put Oprah up there to make us, you know, make us feel good at the end of the day here. Well, end of my day, not y'all's day. But yeah, if you have any other follow-up questions or anything that you wanted to continue to chat about, please feel free to reach out to me. That US phone number does still work, even though I live in Scotland, thanks to Google Voice. So yeah, I'd be happy to, you know, talk, or if there's any help I can offer from afar. So please feel free.
So thank you so much, Melanie. We really, really appreciate that. I know this is Friday evening for you in Scotland. So thank you so much.
No worries. It's not that late, actually. It's only like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. So no big deal.
Well, you know, it's usually considered as happy hour.
Maybe next. Yeah, it might be where I'm headed. So
Okay.
thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everyone. So thank you again for joining us today. I just wanted to let everybody know we do have 2 more Rising Grind this for this semester, because this is towards the end of September, so we'll skip October. We have another one in November. It's about ChatGPT, and we have another session in December talking about this on grading. It's kind of a new method for grade, for, you know, based on not grading. So it will be an interesting one. So please stay tuned. We'll have more information coming out. But again, thank you so much, Melanie, and everybody joining us. So everybody have a nice weekend.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.